All right, let's jump into today's deep dive.
Sounds good.
We're going to be uncovering the truth behind a mystery that has captivated Portugal for decades now.
Oh, this should be interesting.
Yeah, the disappearance of Rui Pedro Teixeira Mendonça.
Wow.
And, you've given us a ton of sources on this,
I have.
including some excerpts from Case File.
Right.
So clearly this case really resonates with you.
It does, yeah.
And we're ready to kind of dig into all the complexities.
Okay.
This case, exploring not just what happened, but also, like all the stuff surrounding the investigations, the media's role,
Yeah.
the whole world of child protection.
Absolutely.
And what strikes me is how this case, just reading through some of the stuff, it just seems like it reveals so much about, investigative approaches and like the ripple effects of these events on a community, even years later.
Yeah, it's amazing how something like this can just linger and impact a community for such a long time.
Right.
Decades, even.
Yeah. And so let's start kind of setting the scene here.
Good.
And the town where Rui Pedro lived, Lusada, Portugal.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just a location, right? It's like a community that's really impacted by this.
Right, absolutely.
So what can you tell us about Lusada?
Well, Lusada is a town with a rich history.
Okay.
Its roots go back to the Middle Ages, and,
Oh.
it's a place where traditions are really important and community ties are very strong.
I see.
And that's really crucial to understand because, Rui Pedro's disappearance wasn't just a news story.
Right.
It was a deeply personal tragedy that really shook this tight-knit community.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, because we're going to be talking a lot about the investigation and all this other stuff, but it's important to remember that at the heart of this is an 11-year-old boy.
Absolutely.
So can you paint us a picture of Rui Pedro, the boy behind the headlines?
Well, he was a lively kid, full of energy.
Like,
He dreamed of becoming a professional soccer player, He loved animals. He had a contagious laugh.
yeah.
There's this anecdote about him trying to use a fork as a TV antenna.
Oh, my
Just those little quirks that make a child unique.
Right.
And understanding him as a real person, not just a name in a case file, really underscores the human cost of this whole thing.
Right. And it seems like, Rui Pedro being a kid, he formed a bond with someone he probably thought was like a really cool older guy.
Right.
A 22-year-old truck driver named Afonso Dias.
Right.
So can you tell us a bit about that relationship?
Yeah, so Dias, he was a regular presence in the family's life.
Okay.
Even drove Rui Pedro and his sister to school sometimes.
Wow.
But this friendship wasn't without concerns, though.
Okay, so there were some red flags there.
Yeah, Rui Pedro's father and grandfather, they were wary of the age gap.
Right, of course.
And, Dias's potential influence, and they expressed those concerns to Filomena, Rui Pedro's mother.
I see.
So there was some tension there.
So it's interesting how these, sort of like the background of this case already has like these little bits of kind of like tension and, foreshadowing almost.
Yeah, definitely.
But it all kind of comes to a head on this seemingly ordinary day, March 4th, 1998.
Right.
This day that would change everything.
Yes.
So can you walk us through what happened?
Sure. So on that day, Rui Pedro went to his mother's workplace, which was her father's driving school.
Okay.
And he asked if he could go for a drive with Dias.
And this is like in the morning? Or...
Yeah, it was during the day. I think it was probably in the afternoon.
Okay.
But Filomena, she refused, reminding him about his tutoring session that he had.
Okay.
And, this was before cell phones were super common.
Right.
So kids had more freedom to roam around.
Right.
So she suggested that he go play in a field behind her office.
Okay. Was this like a typical thing for him to do?
Yeah, it was a big open space. Lots of kids played there.
Okay.
It was bordered by roads, but generally considered safe. So Rui Pedro rode his bike there, seemed happy enough.
So when did the first sign of trouble kind of appear?
Well, the alarm bell started ringing when Rui Pedro's tutor called.
Oh, no.
Wondering why he hadn't shown up for his lesson.
Okay.
And Rui Pedro was usually very diligent about his studies.
Okay.
And he also relied on daily medication for epilepsy.
Right. So this is serious.
Yeah, so this missed appointment quickly turned concern into real panic.
And so at this point, the search for Rui Pedro begins.
Right.
What were some of the initial steps taken?
Well, the family immediately started searching themselves.
Okay.
A neighbor mentioned finding Rui Pedro's bike abandoned in that field.
Oh, wow.
And then a few witnesses came forward claiming they'd seen him getting into a car with Afonso Dias that afternoon.
Oh, interesting.
And so this was really the first big lead in the case.
Wow. So right away, the guy who there was already some suspicion about is now directly linked to Rui Pedro's last known moments.
Exactly.
So how did the police respond to this?
Well, a massive search operation was launched, but challenges emerged right away.
Like what?
Well, Diaz denied giving Rui Pedro a ride.
Okay.
Said he'd only seen him briefly that day.
Okay.
He even suggested that Rui Pedro might have traveled far, and he urged the police to close the borders.
Huh. That's a bit strange.
Yeah, looking back, it seems pretty suspicious.
Yeah, and as if things weren't already hard enough for the family.
Right.
They started receiving these prank calls.
Oh, gosh.
Some demanding ransom.
Wow.
One with a child's voice crying, "Mama!"
Oh, no.
Which Filomena believed was Rui Pedro.
Oh, my goodness.
And then to add even more to their pain, a clairvoyant started sending them messages claiming to have visions of Rui Pedro.
Wow. So they're dealing with all of this while also trying to find their son?
Yeah, it's just like an added layer of stress and chaos.
Absolutely.
So how did the authorities handle these leads?
Unfortunately, they didn't really prioritize them.
Oh, really?
They kind of dismissed them as distractions, unhelpful.
So they weren't trying to, like, trace the calls or anything like that?
Well, the family did suggest ways to trace the calls.
Okay.
But their pleas were ignored.
Wow.
And it's really baffling to think that they didn't see the potential value in those calls, especially in those early days.
Right, yeah.
Technology wasn't as good then, but, caller ID spoofing was already a thing.
Right.
Ignoring those clues seems like a big oversight.
Yeah, it seems like right from the beginning there were missteps and missed opportunities that just kind of came to define this whole case.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Wow, it's incredible how one day can just spiral into so much uncertainty and heartache.
It really is.
And it just makes you think, how many other cases might have similar oversights?
It's a disturbing thought.
It is.
That there could be crucial evidence out there being overlooked.
And we'll delve deeper into those potential missteps and the twists and turns that came after in part 2 of our deep dive.
Right, because this is just the beginning of this story.
Exactly. There's so much more to uncover.
So amidst all the chaos and, the dead ends with the investigation, there was this glimmer of hope.
Oh, really? Where did that come from?
From a photograph taken at Disneyland Paris.
Disneyland Paris. So like a month after he disappeared.
Yeah, April 1998.
Wow, okay.
A Portuguese journalist named Nuno Guerreiro, he was on a family trip to Disneyland Paris.
Okay.
And he takes this picture, just a seemingly ordinary moment, on the Pinocchio's Daring Journey ride.
Okay, so what's so special about this picture?
Well, when the picture was published in a Portuguese magazine, a reader noticed something.
What was that?
In the background, next to an unidentified man, there was a young boy who looked a lot like Rui Pedro.
Oh, wow. I can't imagine what his parents must have.
Yeah, it was a moment of both hope and despair for Filomena and Manuel.
Right.
They were convinced it was their son.
But there's no way to know for sure.
Well, the authorities had limitations.
Okay.
The park's CCTV system malfunctioned that day, so it was useless. And the man in the photo, he was partially obscured, so they couldn't identify him.
So they have this lead, but they can't confirm it.
Exactly.
And so it just kind of goes nowhere.
The photo did spark a lot of speculation, but yeah, the investigation hit another dead end.
Man, so every time it seems like there's a break, there's another roadblock.
Right. It's like one step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah.
But a few months later, a completely different investigation inadvertently shed light on Rui Pedro's case in a way no one expected.
Oh, really? This is where things get interesting.
Right. Tell me about this other investigation.
Okay, so this one was called Operation Cathedral. It was a big British investigation.
Okay.
Targeting an online pedophile ring called the Wonderland Club.
Wow.
And this group was known for sharing images of child abuse.
That's awful.
Yeah, and in September 1998, British police, they made arrests, seized thousands of images.
And what does this have to do with Rui Pedro?
So among those images was one of a young boy labeled Billy.
Okay.
And the authorities believed he resembled Rui Pedro. And in 2001, Filomena and Manuel, they were flown to Geneva to look at the photo.
Oh.
And it was a moment of just gut-wrenching confirmation for them.
Yeah.
Filomena, she knew.
Yeah.
She identified Billy as Rui Pedro.
So confirming that he had been a victim of this network?
Yes, but also offering a sliver of hope that he might still be alive.
Right, because it means he was alive at least at some point after he disappeared.
Exactly. It was a double-edged sword for the family.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So they had this connection, but a big question remained.
What's that?
When and where was this picture of Billy taken?
Right, that's the key piece.
And the Wonderland Club members who had the image, they claim they didn't know.
Oh, really? So again, a lead but no clear answers.
Right, and this pattern of hope and disappointment, it continued for years.
Oh man, that's got to be so hard on the family.
Absolutely.
To go through that over and over again.
And there were false leads too, like this guy Jose de Matos, he was a con artist who preyed on the family's desperation.
Oh my, he claimed he knew where Rui Pedro was, manipulated them into giving him money and resources before they realized he was lying.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Adding insult to injury.
Right, and then there was the Casa Pia scandal, which exposed a pedophile ring operating within Portuguese orphanages.
Oh, wow, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and a former sex worker claimed to have seen Rui Pedro with members of this ring.
Really?
But despite investigations, no concrete evidence ever linked him to that scandal.
So again, another potential connection that just kind of fizzled out.
Exactly.
So did the public's interest in the case fade over time with all these dead ends?
Actually, no.
It didn't.
No, in 2007, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann from a resort in the Algarve, you know that case.
Yeah, of course.
It sparked international outrage, media frenzy.
Right.
And for many in Portugal, the McCann case highlighted what they saw as a disparity in how missing children cases were handled.
So they're suggesting that there was more attention and resources dedicated to Madeleine's case than to cases involving Portuguese children.
Yeah, that was the sentiment.
Wow.
And Filomena was very vocal about this.
What did she say?
She highlighted the lack of support and resources her family received compared to the extensive efforts in Madeleine's case.
Right, and that's a Portuguese child.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
She even said she didn't even know Portugal had forensic police units until Madeleine disappeared.
Oh, wow. That says a lot.
It does.
About the perceived inequalities.
Yeah, and while the McCann case didn't directly impact the investigation into Rui Pedro's disappearance, it did ignite a national conversation about child protection and investigative practices in Portugal.
So it brought renewed scrutiny to Rui Pedro's case.
Yes, particularly focusing back on Afonso Dias.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Right.
What happened with the investigation into Dias? Did they finally determine if he was involved?
Well, in 2011, after years of speculation, Dias was finally indicted, charged with aggravated abduction.
Aggravated abduction, what does that mean?
It carries a heavier weight than a simple kidnapping charge, signifying the severity and premeditation of the crime.
Okay.
And the prosecution, they said that Dias took Rui Pedro to see sex workers and then to an unknown location.
Wow.
They pointed to inconsistencies in his alibi and his actions right after Rui Pedro vanished.
So, but Dias always maintained his innocence, right?
Absolutely. His defense focused on discrediting those key witnesses, highlighting inconsistencies in their testimonies.
So it was a battle of narratives.
Exactly.
So what was the outcome of the trial?
Well, in 2012, Dias was acquitted of the abduction charge.
Acquitted? Really?
Yeah. The judges said there wasn't enough evidence to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
After all these years, and he's found not guilty.
Of abduction, yes.
Wow, so that must have been a huge blow to the family.
It was, but it wasn't the end of the story. Yeah. It was a pretty big shock to everyone, I think.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
But, you know, the family, especially Filomena, they were not giving up.
Nice.
They appealed, they fought for a retrial, and they won.
So they were granted a retrial?
Yes, in 2014.
Wow, that's incredible.
It was a victory, but it was definitely bittersweet, you know?
Yeah, I bet. I mean, so many years.
Yeah, all the legal battles, the constant reliving of the trauma.
Right.
It took a toll on Filomena.
Yeah.
But she found the strength to testify again.
That's amazing.
Yeah, she had to recount everything again in front of a new panel of judges.
So what was the verdict this time?
Well, this time the court found Afonso Dias guilty.
Guilty?
Yes, but not of abduction.
Wait, what?
Yeah, they said that he had taken Rui Pedro from the field that day.
Okay.
But they didn't have enough evidence to prove he was responsible for his ultimate disappearance.
So guilty, but not for the crime that's been at the center of this whole case.
Right. It was a really complicated verdict.
Yeah, it's like a weird in-between.
Exactly.
So what did they find him guilty of then?
They convicted him of corruption of a minor.
Okay.
The judges accepted that he had taken Rui Pedro to see a sex worker.
Right, which is a crime in itself, especially considering Rui Pedro's age.
Exactly.
So it's justice, but not really the justice they were hoping for.
Right, it didn't bring Rui Pedro home.
No, of course not.
And it also sparked a lot of debate about, whether the laws were adequate for these kinds of cases where it's not so clear-cut.
Right. It's such a gray area.
Exactly.
So what was Dias' sentence? Did he ever say anything about where Rui Pedro might be?
Well, on March 4th, 2014...
16 years to the day after Rui Pedro disappeared.
Exactly. He was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison.
Only 3.5 years?
Yeah, and he's always maintained his innocence.
Wow.
Even after the conviction, and to make things worse, he was granted parole for good behavior in 2017.
So he only served like 2/3 of his sentence?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
It's frustrating, and of course he never revealed any information about Rui Pedro's whereabouts.
So the family never really got the closure they deserved?
No, they didn't.
But they didn't give up searching, did they?
No, not at all.
What did they do?
Philomena especially, she became a tireless advocate for her son.
Yeah.
Driven by this belief that he was still alive.
Wow.
She challenged the investigation. She looked into child exploitation networks. She never stopped looking for information.
It's amazing how she never gave up hope.
Yeah, it really is inspiring.
Were there any other leads after Dias' conviction?
There are a few moments that gave them hope.
Like what?
In 2018, a video of a homeless man who looked a bit like Rui Pedro went viral.
Really?
Yeah, but it turned out to be another case of mistaken identity.
Oh, man.
Yeah, heartbreak.
So many twists and turns, so many dashed hopes.
It's a testament to Philomena's strength that she never gave up.
She's an incredible woman.
She is.
You mentioned she was looking into child exploitation networks. What did she find?
Well, it opened her eyes to the horrifying realities of that world. And it solidified her belief that Rui Pedro might have been a victim, especially given the Wonderland Club photos.
Right. That connection is definitely chilling.
It is.
Do you think the police did enough to investigate that angle?
It's hard to say for sure. We don't have all the details of the investigation,
right,
but it's definitely something that raises questions.
Yeah, for sure.
So where does this leave us? Rui Pedro's case is still unsolved.
Right.
Dias was convicted, but not for the crime everyone thought he committed.
Does that give anyone closure? Or is it just more confusing?
It's a partial answer, but it doesn't bring Rui Pedro home.
No.
And that's what Philomena always wanted.
Of course.
The conviction maybe provides some accountability.
Yeah.
But it also shows how limited the legal system can be in addressing such a complex tragedy.
Right.
It makes you think, what can we learn from all of this?
Yeah, what's the takeaway for our listener?
Maybe it's a call to action.
What do you mean?
Rui Pedro's story isn't unique, sadly.
Right, kids go missing all the time.
Exactly, and not all cases get the attention they deserve.
So what can we do as individuals, as a society?
We need to be more vigilant. We need to advocate for better child protection systems.
Right.
We need to support organizations that are working to prevent these tragedies.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, we need to keep Rui Pedro's memory alive.
Not just as a missing child, but as a real person.
Exactly, as a boy who deserves justice, whose story should push us to do better.
For all children.
Yeah.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
And for you, our listener, we'll leave you with this. Rui Pedro's story, it's heartbreaking, but it's also a story of resilience.
Of a mother's unwavering love.
And of a community that hasn't given up hope.
Keep asking questions, keep searching for answers.
And keep the memory of this young boy alive.
He deserves that much.
He does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.